Chapter 4. The Weight of Knowing. The descent took no time at all, which meant it took a very long time. Kess stopped trying to measure it after the third or fourth point where the stairway did something staircases did not do. It doubled back on itself in a direction that was neither up nor down. It passed through spaces that felt like rooms without being rooms, chambers of pure resonance where the air itself seemed to remember being something else. Vera walked with one hand trailing the crystal wall and her eyes closed, reading the structure through her palm. Pyria moved as though she had done this before, or as though something in her blood had done it before and was now reminding the rest of her. Thane watched the shadows with the attention of a man who had spent his whole career learning that threats came from unexpected directions. Then the shaft opened, and the chamber arrived all at once. Spherical. Wrong in scale in a way Kess's mind kept refusing to accept. Too large to be inside anything. The curved walls stretched away in all directions until they became something other than walls. Bioluminescent veins mapped the entire interior surface. A circulatory system the size of a sky, carrying information in pulses that cast the team in shifting aurora light. Blue, green, gold. Never the same twice. At the center, the Remembrance Core floated without visible support. It resembled a seed, though nothing about its scale agreed with that word. Organic and mechanical at once, the size of a small vessel, and it breathed. Its surface flowed with equations and genetic sequences and musical notation, all moving together in a continuous scroll that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. Kess had braced herself for this moment for 5 years. None of that bracing had prepared her for what she was actually looking at. "It's alive," Vera said. "Everything here is alive," Pyria said. "We just stopped being able to see it." Approaching the core meant walking into pressure that wasn't physical. A presence that grew with each step, not in volume, but in dimension. The air felt thicker, and even the light seemed to move slower, though nothing in the chamber had actually changed. Kess's mouth tasted faintly of copper, the way it once had when she'd stood too close to a Dawnforge cell running hot. Her own footsteps sounded wrong to her, as though the chamber itself were deciding how much of them to let through. 5 years of searching had trained her to expect an answer she could hold in her hands, a door, a body, a name. This wasn't a door or a body to reach for. It was scale itself, something she could only stand inside of. Kess felt her individual thoughts beginning to soften at their edges. They were becoming aware of themselves as thoughts, distinct and temporary and small, in a way that felt accurate rather than diminishing. "The cataclysm," Vera said suddenly, her voice distant, thick with feeling she hadn't named yet. "I can feel it. It wasn't an accident. Someone decided this." The core pulsed and knowledge arrived. Not as information delivered, but as understanding that had always been there and was now acknowledged. The planet had been dying, not metaphorically. Kess received it and felt her knees almost buckle. 300 years of accumulated grief, and underneath the grief, the cold clarity of the data that had driven the decision. The biosphere had been pushed past recovery by the civilization that preceded the Sky Cities. The one that had believed its own permanence. The first city scientists had seen it coming with enough precision to know the math. They knew, Thane said, his voice rough. His hands had clenched at his sides. They knew exactly what they were doing. The math had left very few options. They had attempted the merger, not out of ambition but out of desperation, trying to transform their species into something capable of becoming part of the biosphere they had broken. Vera pressed her palm flat against her sternum, as though holding herself together. 30,000 people, she whispered. "And it happened too fast," Kess said, the knowledge settling into her like weather settling into bone. No time for adaptation, no controlled process. 30,000 people and an entire planetary consciousness at once. Pyria had gone to her knees. Her hands were pressed flat to the chamber floor. The floor was pressing back. A faint luminescence spread outward from her palms in fractal patterns. The core spoke without location, and the survivors fled, built cities in the sky to escape what they believed was contamination. The planet kept reaching for them. Each attempt was interpreted as attack. 3 centuries passed in this misunderstanding. Kess noticed something then. The knowledge was arriving in a sequence, not randomly, not as raw data. It was organized. It led with the planet's desperation, then the scientist's sacrifice, then the survivor's mistake. The narrative was structured the way an argument is structured, leading her toward a conclusion. The planet was not lying. Everything it showed her was true. But it was presenting its case, and that was a different thing from simply offering information. She filed this next to the navigation error from the surface, and next to the Guardian's too practiced gentleness with Thane. It was a small collection of observations that did not yet add up to a conclusion, but they were accumulating with a consistency she could not ignore. Thane stood apart from the others, breathing hard. His eyes reflected the core's light in ways that had nothing to do with his pupils. "My team," he said quietly, 15 years ago. The core's voice arrived with compassion rather than hesitation. "They are here. Would you like to know them again?" What happened next was private. Kess looked away. But through the network she felt the edges of it, a change in pressure more than a feeling she could name. Thane's awareness reaching into the core's memory and finding what he'd lost there. The feeling that came back was not what she expected, warmer and stranger than pure relief or simple reconciliation. There was warmth in it, yes, gratitude, the absence of blame he'd been promised. But there was more to it. A thread of sharp cold running through the warmth. One of the voices in the memory was not reconciled. One of Thane's team had died angry, not at Thane, but at the planet. At the integration that had come for them without asking. At the forced transformation that had killed 3 people and changed 2 and left Thane carrying pieces he hadn't consented to. That anger was preserved in the core's memory alongside the gratitude, and the core had not mentioned it. Thane came back from the private communion with his face wet and his jaw set in a way that was not purely grief. "Mira says hello," he told Kess. "She also says to be careful. She says the planet is not lying, but it is not telling everything." Vera looked up sharply from the schematics that had begun to bloom in the air around the core. "What does that mean?" "It means what I said." Thane's voice had a new steadiness. His worst fear had been confirmed, and that alone should have broken him. Instead, relief moved in right alongside the grief, unwilling to let either one have the last word. "I told you about Voss once, the Ashgate run." He called a read a false positive because it was the read he wanted, and it cost him half his team. He looked at the schematics turning in the air, then back at Kess. "I don't intend to be Voss twice." "I'd been collecting my own version of that," Kess said quietly, "for him alone." The navigation error on the surface. The way it handled you, back in the garden. Now this. She held up 3 fingers without meaning to, an old counting habit left over from mission briefings, and only noticed she'd done it once. Thane's eyes dropped to her hand. 3 times now it steered me somewhere useful, and never once mentioned what the steering cost. I don't know yet if that's a flaw in the plan, or if it is the plan. Thane held her gaze. "Mira wasn't guessing when she told me to be careful." "No," Kess said. "I don't think either of us is." The core continued as though it had not heard this exchange. Perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps it had and chose not to respond. Both possibilities were instructive. She filed this next to the rest, no longer alone with it. Either way, the only method she trusted anymore was to keep asking for more. She learned to hold the answers next to each other instead of trusting any single one alone. "Show us," Kess said. "Show us what partnership looks like." The core's surface shifted. Architectural schematics moved through the air around them. living designs for structures that grew rather than being built, that healed rather than wearing out, that participated in the planetary system rather than drawing from it like open wounds. Transformations of the Driftspires, not replacements. Vera was weeping, without apparent awareness that she was weeping. Her hands moved through the schematics with the absorbed intensity of someone who has just found the solution to a problem that has consumed their life's work. Kess stood at the center of it all and let the knowledge finish arriving. What she received was not instructions, it was context. The full weight of 300 years of attempted communication. Every mathematical proof dismissed as system error. Every taint-affected individual classified as contaminated and contained. Every expedition that had reached this place and been erased from the official record afterward. The planet had been patient, but its patience had nothing to do with passivity. It had everything to do with certainty that the conversation would eventually be completed. It was certain because it had already seen how it ended, not the details, just the shape of it. That certainty, Kess thought, that was the thing that sat wrong. Not a planet hoping for reconciliation. A planet that had already calculated the outcome and was engineering its arrival. The difference between an open hand and a hand that knows you will take it. The knowledge transfer completed between one breath and the next. Kess came back to herself standing in the same place she'd been standing. The chamber looked different now, more itself than it had before. She understood the veins in the walls were conversations, the aurora light memory made visible. Somewhere underneath that understanding, the low hum she'd taken for background noise since the shaft first opened resolved into something closer to breathing. It was unhurried and patient, the same rhythm the core had kept for 3 centuries. "We have to go back," she said. Pyria was already standing. Kess hadn't seen her get up. The luminescence was gone from her palms, but something in her stance held on to its charge. She looked like a woman confirming a suspicion 8 generations old rather than discovering a new one. "They will not believe it from a stranger's mouth," she said. "They will believe it even less from 4 people carrying the below on their skin. But my people have been telling this story to each other for 8 generations. I can at least tell it with the weight of 8 generations under it. That's more than 4 people who just came back changed can offer on their own." "They won't listen," Thane said. He had returned to himself as well, though his face had changed, more complicated than the old guilt simply dismantled and replaced with peace. The guilt partially lifted. A new wariness settled in alongside the relief. "The Driftspires. They'll classify us as contaminated and seal us away before we get through a sentence." "Some will listen," Vera said. She was still looking at the schematics that moved through the air around her, committing them to a memory that was no longer entirely her own. "The engineers will listen. The ones who've been watching the Dawn Forges fail and running the math and knowing the math doesn't end well, they'll listen." "We need someone with authority," Kess said. "Someone who can make the council hear it before they hear the word contaminated and stop listening. Someone whose judgment hadn't just spent an hour inside 300 years of the planet's own case for itself." She wanted a second set of eyes precisely because she no longer trusted that her own hadn't been angled. Nobody had an answer for that yet. That was fine. They had time to find one on the way back. They turned together, without needing to discuss it, toward the stairway that had brought them down. Kess's legs remembered the climb before her mind had finished deciding to leave. Behind them, the core's light kept moving through its own endless conversation, indifferent to whether anyone stayed to receive it. The core spoke as they turned to go. "Bridge, you carry our voice now. The truth will spread, as seeds do. Where the soil is ready, they will grow." Kess thought about soil, about what made it ready. Rain fell on ground because the sky above it changed, not because the ground had asked for rain. She wondered how much of her own readiness the planet had already arranged before she ever felt it arrive.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.